We assume that wealth brings freedom, yet it often brings isolation, a quiet distancing from most people that feels deliberate, protective, and almost instinctual in its execution. Those who acquire great resources begin to notice subtle frictions in social environments. Small imbalances that once were invisible, now amplified in importance by the stakes of consequence. Even casual interactions carry potential cost, misinterpretation, or expectation, and the wealthy learn early to navigate these currents with minimal exposure, preserving attention and energy for meaningful matters. The mind gradually shifts toward evaluating relationships not by warmth or familiarity, but by alignment, reliability, and potential for influence or disruption, creating a natural preference for selective engagement. This avoidance is rarely dramatic or overt. It manifests quietly, in small choices about who to meet, what conversations to enter, and which environments to inhabit. The distance feels natural to them, yet uncomfortable to observers, who perceive aloofness, exclusivity, or even arrogance, without understanding the subtle calculations that produced it. Physical presence becomes curated. Time spent with others is evaluated continuously. Small interactions weighed against potential gain, distraction, or emotional expenditure. The wealthy develop an acute awareness of social friction, reading intentions, expectations, and possible manipulations before engaging, creating a mental filter that limits exposure to unnecessary interactions. Even within family or close circles, they may appear restrained, measured, or distant, not from disinterest, but from an internal prioritization of attention and mental energy. Their lives gradually become quieter, their social circles smaller, their conversations lean, and every interaction is a deliberate choice rather than a reflexive exchange of social habit. In this quiet avoidance lies both protection and power, a subtle architecture of social strategy often invisible to those outside this world of calculated presence. It is not a need to dominate, but a need to preserve space, autonomy, and clarity. And over time, this creates a personality attuned to caution, observation, and selective engagement. Even casual encounters are scrutinized unconsciously, because the mind has learned that exposure carries consequences that ripple far beyond the moment of interaction. What appears as solitude or reserve is often the outward expression of a finely tuned cognitive and social filtering system, designed to manage energy and influence simultaneously. The wealthy avoid most people not out of disdain, but because they have discovered that the cost of unnecessary interaction often exceeds its benefit, and silence becomes a protective default. At the core of this behavior is a fundamental psychological distinction. The wealthy calibrate attention and trust differently, assessing potential interaction based on risk, value, and alignment rather than habit or social expectation. Behavioral psychology shows humans naturally seek approval, connection, and belonging, yet wealth changes the context, introducing amplified visibility, consequence, and social complexity that demand new cognitive strategies. Decision-making becomes anticipatory, calculating not only immediate outcomes but also long-term repercussions across social, financial, and reputational dimensions, producing a preference for minimal exposure. The wealthy often internalize emotional regulation, mastering restraint because unfiltered reaction or oversharing can produce cascading consequences, whereas measured silence preserves autonomy and reduces risk. Trust becomes selective, an internalized hierarchy where access to attention, information, and time is rationed according to alignment, reliability, and potential impact on personal or professional objectives. Social friction is mentally weighted. Even minor disagreements are evaluated for likelihood of escalation, emotional cost, and effect on long-term strategy, prompting avoidance of non-essential interaction. Cognitive patterns evolve toward predictive modeling. The mind simulates multiple potential responses, consequences, and motives before engagement, producing subtle hesitation or restraint in daily life. Emotional investment is filtered, where energy is allocated to interactions that produce tangible value, insight, or alignment, and dissipated on encounters deemed irrelevant or potentially disruptive. This leads to quiet boundaries, subtle distancing, and selective engagement, where silence is not absence but strategy, a way to preserve attention and manage social complexity effectively. Over time, patterns of avoidance become habitual, producing a personality that appears reserved or distant, yet is in fact finely tuned to navigate environments saturated with expectation and influence. Behavioral reinforcement strengthens these traits. Successful outcomes from selective engagement increase the likelihood of repeated restraint, consolidating avoidance as a stable, internalized response. Social perception is carefully managed. They understand that visibility, explanation, and interaction carry consequences, and minimizing unnecessary exposure protects influence without overt assertion. Even generosity, casual conversation, and minor social gestures are measured for effect, demonstrating an internal calculus where value and risk are continuously assessed before engagement. Overexposure to ordinary social interaction is treated as cognitive cost. The wealthy adapt by curating attention, choosing only connections that advance objectives or align with principles. This recalibration creates a quiet world around them, where distance is not loneliness but a protective strategy, optimizing mental, emotional, and social resources in ways invisible to outsiders. Energy, time, and attention become scarce resources, and avoidance functions as a tool to preserve these resources while maintaining control over influence and perception. By filtering interactions through consequence, alignment, and subtle evaluation, the wealthy gradually construct lives where proximity is intentional, engagement is meaningful, and silence is powerful. In everyday life, this avoidance manifests in small but consistent ways, such as declining invitations that carry no strategic or personal significance, preserving energy for meaningful interactions. Even routine conversations are evaluated before engagement. The wealthy often listen without reacting immediately, silently analyzing motives, potential gain, or the risk of distraction from more important priorities. They may appear distant at social gatherings, choosing observation over participation, noting behavioral patterns and social hierarchies without offering unnecessary commentary or revealing personal information. Professional meetings often reveal precision in engagement. They focus only on outcomes, timelines, and influence rather than casual dialogue or excessive explanation that consumes time without measurable value. When approached with casual questions or opinions, responses are brief, neutral, and carefully measured, leaving the interlocutor aware that unnecessary exposure is unwelcome and boundaries are maintained. Even family interactions may be restrained, not from disinterest, but from an internal prioritization of time, attention, and emotional energy that guides selective engagement. Business decisions demonstrate the same pattern. They prefer correspondence, data, or controlled meetings over spontaneous interactions, reducing exposure to unpredictability, persuasion, or social friction. Travel, entertainment, and leisure are also curated. Companions are chosen for trustworthiness, alignment, and discretion, limiting potential social drain or misalignment with broader objectives. Charitable acts, although sometimes visible, are executed with subtlety and intent, balancing personal principles, public perception, and potential influence without overexposing motives or inviting expectation. Even casual friendships reflect the same approach. Social circles are small, composed of individuals whose presence offers trust, insight, or alignment, while peripheral relationships are maintained politely but at a distance. The wealthy often avoid environments that encourage gossip, emotional drama, or social obligation, preferring spaces that allow control, clarity, and autonomy while minimizing unnecessary interaction. Decision-making about minor matters, like dining or transportation, also reflects selective engagement, where efficiency, privacy, and comfort outweigh casual social convenience or obligation. They recognize the psychological cost of overexposure, understanding that even brief encounters can produce ripple effects across reputation, influence, or emotional stability if not carefully managed. Patterns of silence, restraint, and selective engagement gradually solidify, shaping personality traits that prioritize discretion, autonomy, and mental clarity over casual social validation. Observation becomes a tool. By remaining minimally engaged, they gather insight, influence perception, and preserve energy without explicit assertion or explanation. Subtle cues such as tone, timing, and body language are carefully managed to communicate presence, authority, or alignment without unnecessary disclosure. Even in humor or casual discussion, measured restraint ensures interactions do not create obligation, vulnerability, or emotional drain, preserving control over attention and perception. Interactions often feel deliberate yet natural, demonstrating how avoidance and selective engagement function as adaptive strategies rather than overt withdrawal or social rejection. The wealthy develop a quiet understanding of social efficiency, where every engagement is evaluated for alignment, consequence, and return, minimizing unnecessary expenditure of cognitive or emotional resources. Over time, these small, deliberate behaviors produce a personality characterized by calm, selective, and strategic engagement, which may appear aloof or distant but functions as a protective adaptation. Beneath this behavior lies a convergence of cognitive, emotional, and social mechanisms that sustain selective engagement and subtle avoidance in daily life. Cognitive restructuring allows prediction of social consequences, weighing potential risk, influence, and alignment before any interaction, producing hesitation and intentional filtering of contacts. Emotional regulation is internalized. Unguarded expression is minimized to prevent ripple effects, stress, or obligations, ensuring that mental energy remains available for meaningful or high-stakes encounters. Attention becomes a scarce resource. Interactions, information, and even casual requests are filtered to preserve clarity, focus, and control over personal and social priorities. Trust is psychologically calibrated, with relationships evaluated for reliability, alignment, and potential benefit, producing an internal hierarchy that guides selective engagement and cautious exposure. Behavioral reinforcement strengthens avoidance patterns. Repeated positive outcomes from discretion, restraint, and minimal exposure condition habitual preference for limited interaction over impulsive engagement. Social perception is constantly monitored. Even minor disclosure is assessed for potential consequences, ensuring influence and autonomy remain protected without overt assertion. Isolation is functional rather than punitive. It reduces exposure to unnecessary manipulation, obligation, or distraction, allowing strategic energy allocation to matters of real importance. Patterns of avoidance and silence create protective psychological boundaries, minimizing external pressures while sustaining internal clarity and control over cognitive resources. The wealthy internalize the consequences of overdisclosure. Explanation, social affirmation, or casual engagement is treated as potentially costly, producing a preference for quiet observation over engagement. Subtle avoidance extends to generosity, humor, and casual conversation, which are measured for audience, context, and alignment with long-term goals, producing authentic but strategic interactions. Psychologically, this selective engagement reinforces a sense of autonomy, security, and internal stability, reducing dependence on external approval or validation for mental equilibrium. Even small social decisions reflect this architecture. Timing, presence, and context are chosen for minimal cognitive cost, maximal clarity, and optimal alignment with priorities. The mind adapts over time to filter ordinary social input, preserving energy while maintaining sufficient engagement to sustain influence, relationships, and social alignment. Silence, restraint, and minimal exposure are adaptive mechanisms, not deficits, reflecting cognitive efficiency, emotional discipline, and strategic social perception in high-stakes environments. Repeated practice of these patterns produces a personality calibrated for autonomy, influence, and mental clarity, which may appear distant or aloof but functions as a protective and strategic adaptation. Observing these subtle patterns can be quietly illuminating, and if such insights resonate with your curiosity, subscribing provides a space to revisit psychological analysis with calm reflection. It is not a request for attention, but an invitation to follow ideas carefully explored over time, where understanding human behavior and social dynamics unfolds gradually and deliberately. A common misconception is that the wealthy are aloof or antisocial by choice, when in reality avoidance is a protective strategy shaped by repeated exposure to consequence, manipulation, and expectation. Many believe wealth automatically produces happiness and social ease, yet greater resources amplify scrutiny, opportunism, and obligation, demanding recalibrated attention and selective interaction to preserve mental clarity. People often assume that generosity, openness, and friendliness are constant traits, overlooking that measured restraint and strategic engagement often guide behavior without diminishing authenticity or ethical alignment. Another myth suggests that social isolation is voluntary or indulgent, when it is frequently an adaptive response to preserve energy, influence, and emotional equilibrium in complex social landscapes. Observers may equate silence with arrogance, failing to recognize that careful discretion protects autonomy, minimizes unnecessary exposure, and sustains long-term decision-making capacity. Many assume wealthy individuals do not experience insecurity, yet internal stability is cultivated, reinforced, and often hidden beneath strategic social filtering, careful observation, and selective engagement. Some believe decision-making becomes easier with abundance, but elevated stakes, visibility, and consequence produce greater cognitive complexity, demanding precision, restraint, and selective exposure rather than impulsive action. Wealth does not fundamentally change personality superficially. It reshapes attention, trust, and emotional response patterns over time, producing traits that are protective, strategic, and sometimes alien to outsiders. These misconceptions obscure the subtle psychology underlying wealth, leaving outsiders unaware of the cognitive, emotional, and social adaptations that create the quiet distance they observe. Over time, one notices that avoidance patterns are not merely behavioral choices, but manifestations of deeper cognitive recalibration, emotional discipline, and strategic social awareness, quietly shaping personality. Curiosity is tempered by discretion, spontaneity by calculation, and trust by careful evaluation, producing a self-attuned to high-stakes environments while maintaining autonomy and mental clarity. Social engagement is deliberate, limited, and aligned with internal priorities, while casual exposure is minimized to preserve attention, reduce risk, and maintain influence over perception and outcomes. Even in family, friendship, and professional networks, measured presence ensures energy is preserved for meaningful interaction, and social capital is managed without excessive emotional expenditure. The quiet patterns of restraint and selective engagement produce a subtle influence, demonstrating that silence, discretion, and observation can be as powerful as direct assertion in shaping perception. Isolation is rarely loneliness. It is a strategic tool, balancing engagement with autonomy, clarity, and foresight, producing a life where mental resources are preserved and consequences are anticipated. Ultimately, the wealthy avoid most people not from disdain, but because the cost of unnecessary exposure outweighs potential benefit, and the mind adapts to optimize energy, influence, and control. The transformation is gradual, cumulative, and often invisible, leaving personality traits that are measured, observant, and calibrated to navigate social complexity with precision and quiet authority. In the end, the psychology of selective engagement reveals that distance is not merely physical or emotional, but a reflection of adaptive cognition, strategic awareness, and subtle preservation of mental and social resources. This quiet architecture of personality underscores a profound truth. The spaces we maintain, the people we engage with, and the silence we cultivate shape not only influence, but the contours of self itself.